Can people move forward, please? We're going to start right now. Hope people can hear that outside, because you shouldn't be. Come in here. Because I'd like to welcome you all to this session of Ecosocialism 2024 here on Sunday morning. Suharto's lingering shadow, human rights in Indonesia and West Papua after Prabowo's election. That recent election, I think at the start of 2024, if my memory is not too bad. That's correct. Look, my name's Jonathan Strauss. I'm the Socialist Alliance FNQ branch convener. Indeed, Socialism Australia does get as far as the tropics, and I'll be chairing this session. Look, just for those who haven't been here at the conference already, just some important information. You've got your toilets over here, and the door to the right to me here. We also have drinks and snacks behind through the door here. If you can be relatively quiet if you're getting things there, the noise does come back into the room. I just want to mention too, the books are for sale during the conference period, and in fact the Adelaide branch has bought a great selection of t-shirts which can be found out in the laneway at the back here as well. Please have a look at that. Green Left and Socialist Alliance are indeed the hosts of this conference. If you're inspired, and I find this conference pretty inspiring, I hope you do too, to become a socialist activist, you can either join or stay in touch with us. Now, given the technology discussion yesterday, QR codes are around the room, or you're welcome to come up, I don't know, Sue. Sue will be holding the QR codes. Come up, aim your phone at them, and then sign up to find out more, even to join. Please talk with Sue, of course, she's actually a person, not just a machine. And if you have any questions, and find out more about it. I don't think we've actually got a contact list, but we do have the QR code, which is just that much better. Before I continue, though, of course, one very important thing. I want to acknowledge that we're holding the conference, this conference, on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people. Land was never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The Socialist Alliance stands in solidarity with Indigenous people in this land. They haven't given me a complete solidarity statement, but the plain fact is we stand for full material and sovereignty for Aboriginal people in this country. That's the basics of it. Let's be blunt. I will, this is not well organised. I'm going to introduce our two speakers. That's what I'm going to do first. And the first of them is, and we have two, Rebecca Meckelburg and Veronica Koman. I'll actually introduce Veronica properly when she's set to speak, but firstly Rebecca. Now Rebecca, some of us who are way too long on the tooth may know from the times we were perhaps working with her in the 1990s on solidarity in particular, but not only of course, in particular on solidarity work with the Indonesia pro-democracy movement and the East Timorese liberation movement here in Australia. But in 2002, she moved to live in Indonesia, and since then has been pursuing very similar interests in that country. Today she is an independent research scholar based in Central Java, Indonesia, and she has affiliations to the Indonesia Pacific Research Centre at Murdoch University and the Institute of International Studies, I'm going to have to try to get this right, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay, well, thanks for that introduction, Jonathan. It's been a long time before I've stood in front of an audience of comrades in Australia at a conference like this, so thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. As Jonathan mentioned, in February this year, Indonesia's presidential elections were held and Prabowo Subianto was elected as Indonesia's 8th president. This was his third bid as presidential candidate, having previously been a contender in the 2014 and 2019 elections. Now, while this session focuses on assessing the political situation in Indonesia after the election of Prabowo, the session's title refers to Suharto's lingering shadow. So I want to begin by explaining, first of all, who is Suharto, by giving some short history of the Indonesian and West Papuan people's long struggle for democracy and human rights to provide some context for today's discussion. My presentation will focus on the state of politics and human rights more broadly in Indonesia. Sorry, I should have done that. My presentation will focus on the state of politics and human rights more broadly in Indonesia, while Veronica will speak more specifically about people's struggles for human rights in West Papua. So General Suharto was Indonesia's second president. He rose to power in 1965 and 1966, and this was facilitated by the massacres of more than 1 million Indonesian people and the incarceration of around 1 million more, and the consolidation of a military dictatorship that would be in power for 32 years. The campaign of mass violence led by the Indonesian military under Suharto's command in the mid-1960s brought to an end the political uncertainty about the direction of the Indonesian government in carrying out the tasks of the national revolution. That is, would Indonesia move in a more popular socialist direction, or on the contrary, move to consolidate capitalist development? Of course, this is not unlike many anti-colonial independence struggles or hot wars taking place across Asia during this period. Many of those murdered in the mass violence were members of the Indonesian Communist Party, or the PKI, but hundreds of thousands more were ordinary people, poor people, who'd participated directly in the massive civilian mobilisations and military campaigns to defeat the Dutch colonial regime 2 and 3 decades earlier. Alongside the physical destruction of the organisations of the organised left in the Indonesian Communist Party and the left wing of the Indonesian National Party, the state moved to stamp or brand hundreds of thousands of ordinary people as PKI sympathisers, while banning all forms of grassroots organisations. This was done to realise, I think, 3 things in particular. First of all, to eliminate the PKI right down to its foundations and the broader left-wing nationalist movement, as they were the military's only significant political rival for power. But also to punish communist, left nationalists and local organisations of ordinary people for the mass actions that they'd waged from the 1950s that directly threatened feudal and capitalist property relations. And thirdly, to realise their political and economic ambitions to create a modern capitalist nation state. The Suharto dictatorship developed a national ideology and military structure that gave the army a physical presence at every level of administration, from the national right down to the tiniest village level. And this openly legitimised a repressive role for the army in politics for the next 32 years. So the intentions of Suharto and those that came to power with him were a decisive destruction of the social basis for a new kind of mass-based popular political power. It was an ideological rejection of the popular mass participation that was unleashed during the Indonesian Revolution and which thrived in the 1950s and 1960s. So as I said earlier, Suharto held power for 32 years. And the actions of the military state provided the preconditions necessary for the emergence and consolidation of a strong domestic capitalist class that had not been possible under colonial rule. This required the creation of a highly organised and repressive systems of exploitation of both Indonesian people and Indonesia's natural resources. It also included the annexation of West Papua and Timor-Leste. But like in all capitalist states, the contradictions of this system of extreme exploitation would create the preconditions for the re-emergence of its opponents, the mass of ordinary people in the cities and the villages. Despite the repressive system created to control the mass of urban and rural people and the massive expansion of land areas brought under control of the Indonesian state and private capitalist enterprises, the Suharto regime was unable to create passive, non-resisting lower classes in Indonesia. Throughout this 32 years of dictatorship, there were periodic waves of repression against workers, students and rural poor people who organised themselves in response to this crushing exploitation. Students demanded political rights, and from the 1980s, many NGO organisations emerged, waging political campaigns through lobbying and legal forums, while leveraging support from parties and social solidarity movements internationally. The massive rural movement that emerged in Central Java around the Kedung Ombo Dam in the late 1980s was a historic turning point where new organised left forces began to meet and organise more systematic opposition to the Suharto dictatorship. The People's Democratic Party, or the PRD, who had sister party relations with the Democratic Socialist Party and Socialist Alliance in the 1990s and 2000s, had its origins in part in this and further struggles that developed through the 1990s across Indonesia. Okay, I know I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to try and cut some of this short. So we can see that in the mid-1990s, massive mobilisations of organised workers, small farmers, urban poor people, alongside students and NGO activists, organising in defence of human rights, women's rights, protection of the environment, worker and farmer rights. And this was a dominant feature of social life in the 1990s. And I want to highlight here that these struggles were supported by international solidarity campaigns, particularly in Australia, Europe and the United States, where the Socialist Alliance and Green Left Weekly, along with AXI and Action in Solidarity with Indonesia and East Timor, played a central role in building both solidarity campaigns in Australia, but in promoting solidarity with our international socialist collaborators across the world. And in our view, it was the Indonesian people's own political struggles, supported by international solidarity campaigns, that all contributed to a growing political crisis of legitimacy for the new order dictatorship in the late 1990s, and Suharto resigned on the 21st of May 1998. Okay, no, not yet. Yes, no, yes, yes. Okay. These heroic struggles by the Indonesian people for democracy and the East Timorese for independence were successful in defeating the structures of political rule built and nurtured during 32 years of the New Order dictatorship and enforcing the military out of political institutions and back to barracks. The military's role in direct repression largely stopped, except for, at that time, in Aceh and Papua provinces. The electoral and representative system was opened up to more political parties, and essentially only communist and separatist or independence parties campaigning for independence were banned. Most restrictions on the press and civil society were lifted. But the dismantling of the political structures of dictatorship required something new to replace it. The primary structure that became the scaffolding of the present political system in Indonesia is the electoral and representative systems. These structures allow for multi-party elections, for representative parliaments, as well as for direct elections at national and local executive positions. Now, just a little bit of periodisation. So the first 5 years of what we call reformasi, or the reform movement, was primarily one of transition, where a political crisis that had led to the stepping down of Suharto in 1998 is a very fluid political situation. 3 presidents were installed during that 5-year period: Habibie, Megawati Soekarno Putri and Abdurrahman Wahid. And their presidencies were marked by ongoing contestation over the political direction of the Reformasi movement, a movement made up of diverse social interests and groups, but still involving mass political mobilisations to make their political demands, including the replacement of the dictatorship, with political structures that would more genuinely represent the interests of the majority of ordinary people. How am I going for time? Okay, good. Okay, so the period between 2000 and 2014 was marked by the presidency of Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, and this, I suppose, the character of the political structures was defined by this period politically was defined by the consolidation of the new political structures as the basis for political and economic stability, in the end for political business elites. This restructuring from a centralised authoritarian politics to decentralised multi-party electoralism influenced the fragmentation of political organisations during this time, fragmentation both of political parties and also social movements. In my view, this fragmentation of social movements reflects the more general fragmentation of social movements across the global south. And I think there was a little bit of discussion earlier when we were talking about some incidents of spontaneous uprising. I have a bit of a different analysis. I hope there's time to discuss with comrades later about how we comprehend and understand these, if you like, sudden emergences of mass mobilisations. But in my view, this fragmentation of social movements reflects the more general fragmentation of social movements across the global south under neoliberalism, where many post-colonial states have been pushed to adopt decentralised political systems. This fragmentation has influenced the development of local political struggles, many of which have oriented to regional political structures to make political claims on power and resources, and in some cases, many of them have been successful. But at the same time, for many struggles, this has diverted attention away from building more nationally based campaigns that make demands on a centralised political power or the national government. Okay, jump to 2014. The 2014 elections marked a new turning point in the development of the Indonesian state. Jokowi won by a slim margin in 2014. Has anyone heard of Jokowi? Jokowi Dodo? Okay, right, so we know who we're talking about. So Jokowi's victory was in significant part the result of mass public mobilisations and campaigning from many pro-democracy actors from the period of the 1990s and from civil society and lower middle classes and poor people who saw Jokowi as fresh political blood in a system still largely dominated by military and political figures from the Suharto era. All presidents since Suharto, Habibie, Wahid, Sukarno Putri and Yudhoyono, had been nationally prominent figures during the New Order. Whether supporters or opponents of the New Order, they were products of that period and the social world defined by its political elites. Now, Jokowi's popularity was built in part on implementing specific popular welfare policies, in particular a universal healthcare system. In a broader society, the perception of Widodo's candidacy as a manifestation of a new political process unfolding was strengthened by the contrast with his presidential rival, Prabowo Subianto, who's just been elected, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Prabowo himself hailed from an elite, very wealthy New Order family and was married to one of Suharto's daughters. He had a strong military career, rising very quickly through the ranks of the army, and in 1998 he headed the Elite Special Forces organisation Kopassus, designing strategy for military security in East Timor. But in a substantial sense, the key differences between Prabowo and Jokowi were in their attitudes to the system of decentralisation and direct election of government heads at national, provincial and district levels that had been established during the Reformasi period. When Widodo was elected, there were expectations that something new was going to take place politically. However, Widodo proved himself to be committed only to the continuation of the system developed by Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, or SBY's presidency, one defined by transactional politics amongst political and economic elites. This intra-elite transactionalism and the absence of substantial programmatic difference was only possible because the different factions of the country's elite share the same basic socio-economic interests and outlook. Okay, now, I can talk about that more later if people have got questions, but I just want to get to the point of talking about Prabowo. Okay, so now I want to turn to the question of what difference will a Prabowo-led Indonesian government look like in terms of human rights, but more generally, what can we anticipate might happen in terms of the political condition in Indonesia? Well, as Prabowo is yet to be installed as president, there are 4 factors that I think might help us to evaluate or predict what the human rights situation under a Prabowo presidency will look like. And there's 4. 1, what has been the human rights record during Jokowi's presidency? Because given the level of inter-elite agreement and the position of Prabowo in Jokowi's cabinet, this will give us some general picture, I think. Secondly, the level of inter-elite stability, and this was one of Jokowi's main achievements in his 2 periods of presidency, was to bring together a united elite where there was essentially no elite political opposition. The challenge for Prabowo is whether he's going to be able to maintain that level of inter-elite stability. The third question is Prabowo himself, how his long-term military, business and political experience will shape his presidency. And we can look at positions that he's held previously in previous governments. And the fourth one is domestic and international solidarity campaigns in defence of human rights and the environment in West Papua and more broadly in Indonesia. So just on the question of human rights under Jokowi. Is that there? Oh no. Yeah, no, I haven't got any more slides on that. I've just got a few slides a bit later, just photos from the more recent political period. Well, since the year 2020 in particular, Indonesia has recorded the highest number of human rights violations in Asia, with the state, as in the government, being the most frequent perpetrator of these human rights violations. The Papuan provinces, in Australia we refer to as West Papua, have a disproportionately large proportion of reported human rights violations, both of Papuan people based in West Papua, but also Papuan students located right across Indonesia who hold peaceful demonstrations to support their people's struggles against the Indonesian state, who are destroying their lands and forests with the intention to replace them with agribusiness, particularly palm oil production, and extractive development, that is mining. Extrajudicial killings by the state or state-mobilised actors in Papua, including both the police and the military, have drawn significant international attention in the second period of the Jokowi presidency, and Veronica will go into this in much more detail later. Okay, the second point in terms of human rights, one of the central aspect of Jokowi's economic program since 2014 has centred around the development of various strategic national projects. And all of these have involved the violation of human rights of its citizens in one way or another. Many of these national strategic projects have seen the state take violent action to force the expropriation of people from their land. Indeed, during Jokowi's reign, the most effective broker for land grabbing for development has been the central government, and they've carried out these actions in the name of public interest. Nearly half of the current 300 strategic national projects that have been launched by the Jokowi government have documented cases of violations of the rights of local communities. And according to a new report released earlier this year by a legal and human rights advocacy group, there have been cases of intimidation, torture, criminalisation and forced evictions carried out by security forces in 144 of these 300-odd projects. And I think in Papua, only 2 are in Papua, so the rest are in the rest of Indonesia. Okay. All right. The third point in terms of Jokowi's human rights record is when Jokowi was elected, he made great promises to resolve historical cases of the state's violation of human rights, both 1965 and other incidents of state violence during the New Order dictatorship. However, his appointment of former military generals from the New Order to both his cabinet ministries after his election in 2014 and 2019 have essentially permitted the culture of impunity for past human rights violations to continue. These include former generals with serious records of human rights violations and who benefited massively financially during the New Order and are themselves very wealthy businessmen in their own right. One is Suharto, who comrades who are active in the 1990s in the solidarity campaigns would be aware of. He was the coordinating minister for politics, law and security in Jokowi's first presidential period and chairman of the Presidential Advisory Committee in his second presidential period. Luhut Panjaitan, another general, was a coordinating minister for politics and law and security, is now the head of Jokowi's presidential staff. And Prabowo himself, who was appointed as the defence minister in Jokowi's second cabinet. Okay, I don't know if Veronica is going to say anything about this, but just to be really specific, I think it's probably clear at this stage. Since 2020, there's been an increasing record of patterns of human rights violations across Indonesia that include information restrictions by hacking, doxing, profiling, essentially to stifle public discourse and debate and also political campaigning. There's been physical violence to repress mass mobilisations and other expressions of political organising and political agency, and psychological and symbolic violence. And these include criminalisation, delegitimisation of people's land ownership, that is rejecting the land that historically they own and they have certificates and so on and so on. And many of these cases are linked directly to the government's national strategic projects. We're seeing criminalisation of activists, and Veronica, who will speak next, is one of those. We've had arbitrary arrests and other forms of intimidation towards communities mobilising against these state land grabs, as I mentioned before, but also more recently against human rights activists. 2 long-term human rights activists, Haris Asar and Fatia Maulidyanti, were charged under defamation laws against Luhut Panjaitan, who I mentioned earlier as one of the military generals in Jokowi's cabinet, and so on. There's ongoing cases of things like this. These people are charged, held over for several years, but it's an effective form of intimidation. Freedom of association, there's increased police harassment, intimidation of citizens, particularly those protesting the national government's development projects. But very recently, in May this year, there was a forced dispersal of the People's Water Forum in Bali. Now, the People's Water Forum is an international meeting of pro-people water activists organised to oppose water privatisation and advocate for water management, benefiting public welfare. This was violently forced to disband by a militia organisation called Patriot Garuda Nusantara. This is a tactic used very widely during the New Order dictatorship. So we're seeing these forms of repression emerging again. Okay. So that's Jokowi's human rights record. Inter-elite stability, I won't say very much about this, but just one of the things that Prabowo has talked a lot in his speeches, both prior to the election and since he's been elected, is stressing the need for unity. And I think in this case, he refers to two things specifically. The need to preserve the unity of these political business elites, that is political and economic stability. And this is what is a very unknown factor about whether he's going to be able to do that. There's going to be a number of potential challenges as a social economic crisis in Indonesia worsens, as it is across the global south and the global north. This will create increasing challenges to the economic programs of a Prabowo government. The second one is unity of the Indonesian state. And Veronica might mention NKRI, Harga Mati. But essentially, this is about projecting legitimacy for state violence against independent struggles, such as we're seeing in West Papua for now a very long time. And in this particular case, West Papua is at the pointy end of this state violence. Previously, it's been Aceh and East Timor. Okay, so Prabowo himself. He's a conservative right-wing nationalist. His entire professional career in the military, as a businessman and politician, have been shaped by both his elite family background. He spent his youth in Europe. He pursued a military career where he was trained in special forces ideology in the US military at a time where counterinsurgency against conventional warfare was resurrected as a strategic approach to dealing with popular movements in Central and Latin America in the 1980s. So that's his background. Prabowo also received training in Germany's GSG 9 police special forces. And in military officer training school in the mid-1980s, he developed the thesis that the successful incorporation of East Timor into the unitary Indonesian Republic must offer strategic groups in the annexed territory exclusive and obvious advantages in terms of material benefits. So if comrades remember Apodeti and some of the militia organisations organised around that political base, this is the kind of tactic that they're replicating. I imagine they will accelerate replicating this kind of thing in West Papua, and maybe Veronica has some information on that. Because time is limited, my central point in this is that in relation to securing stability in Indonesia during Prabowo's presidency, we can anticipate that his approach is significantly influenced by his military training and experience of mobilising security forces while fostering splits and factions within opposition movements by buying or co-opting sections of these to undermine social solidarities on the one hand, while terrorising other sections of these mobilised social groups and organisations. So I think this is part of a broader security strategy combining direct repression and intimidation. All right, okay. I think that's pretty clear. All right. I'll let Veronica say more about Prabowo and West Papua. Just on a final point about domestic and international solidarity campaigns in defence of human rights and the environment, I think this is going to be a very interesting thing to see what will unfold in this next period. The human rights record of the Indonesian state, led by Jokowi, has worsened with its economic development, or NSP, National Strategic Project Program, and this is likely to continue and very probably worsen under Prabowo, particularly in a case of rising social and economic instability, as the direction of Indonesia's economic development is likely to remain focused on accelerating natural resource extraction while retaining a modest manufacturing sector. The consequences will be the destruction of Indonesia's remaining forests, largely in West Papua, an ongoing conversion of agricultural land to industry, and the expansion of spaces for middle-class urban economic activity and tourism. All of these projects involve evicting the poor and most vulnerable from their homes and lands, with increasingly nowhere else to go. The revitalisation of domestic solidarity campaigns with local people struggles within Indonesia, particularly those being displaced by these national strategic projects, has been happening and I think will continue to develop. And there are small-scale meetings amongst different groups to discuss initiating more systematic coordination. And very recently, with the All Eyes on Rafah, just most recently emerged All Eyes on Papua within Indonesia itself. And this has gained significant momentum on social media, calling for Indonesian people to pay attention to what's happening in Papua, where the struggles of the Aulyu and Moi tribes are fighting for their right to live in customary forests they've lived in long before Indonesia became independent, and which are now being turned into concession lands for oil palm plantations. Okay, so on a final note, like the general theme of this conference, I think this is a time for us to renew our efforts to build people-to-people solidarity in the Indo-Pacific. In my mind, Indonesia is on the way to a return of the kind of repression we saw during the New Order, and the challenges of organising in the face of this are different from those we faced 25, 30, 35 years ago. Both domestically, due to the fragmentation of social movements and organisations with radical anti-capitalist programs, but also the decline of people-to-people solidarity since the 1990s, certainly with Indonesia, and West Papua is obviously the exception. In the 1990s, we, Socialist Alliance, Green Left, were successful in campaigning to make the connections between the struggles for East Timorese people's independence and the pro-democracy, anti-dictatorship movement across the whole of Indonesia. And I hope that this is something that we can explore and discuss about how to build this awareness in the West Papuan solidarity campaigns, but also for us to give solidarity to the struggles of ordinary Indonesian people while highlighting what's going on in West Papua. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that superb, consolidated 50-plus year history of Indonesia's post-independence politics. All eyes on Papua, hey? Because, you know, it is actually only just across the water. And yet I think we really don't know enough about what's going on in that struggle for liberation of the Papuan people in West Papua in particular. Rebecca mentioned the human rights violations in West Papua as the concentration of that in West Papua, but throughout Indonesia. I mean, this is defending the regimes and imperialist interests, in particular in West Papua, the international local owners of the Grasberg mine in particular. I think this is quite well described, for example, in John Matinkas's book, The Road, that's it, The Road, it's just called that. But I have to note, its suppliers as well, the Australian suppliers, including, I think, quite a few that actually quite significant suppliers based in Cairns, who are the ones that avoid public profile among the business community there. So, All Eyes on Papua, which is an excellent introduction for Veronica Koman. It is Koman, even though it's one O. There you go. She is today in exile in Gadigal, Sydney, of course from Indonesia, but kept away from there by their repressive laws, an Indonesian human rights lawyer and West Papua solidarity activist based in Gadigal, Sydney. She has been working quite closely with activist here. I mean, she joined us for the Ecosocialism conference we had in Cairns in 2022, and I think spoke in 2023 as well. And we are very happy to welcome her here again at Ecosocialism 2024. Veronica Koman.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for not forgetting about West Papua. It's always heartening to see that West Papua is part of the left scene in Australia. Thank you, Rebecca, for the excellent background. So I don't have to do that. But as an Indonesian, I'd like to add a little bit. Oh, hang on. I'll share my screen first. How to share screen? Oh, okay. my sorry about that. I will find it soon. Hang on. Oh, it's a host. Apparently, the host disabled participant screen sharing. Could you please? Sorry, there's always technical issue with these things. Yeah, so I'm joining from the land of Gadigal people of Eora Nation. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And while we waiting, oh, so is it or still disabled? And anyway, so yeah, adding to what Rebecca has said earlier, that during the reform, yes, the reform movement that toppled Suharto, Indonesians, we often say that it's a pity that it was only a reform. We should have had revolution, because what Jokowi's been doing is to welcome back all those old oligarchs back back to Indonesian political scene, and with now holding being public officials, and is that's why we are Indonesian activists, we describe Jokowi era as New Order 2.0. New Order, it's Suharto era, so it's Suharto 0.0. And that leads to my presentation today. The flow will be, I will explain about briefly about the root cause of the colonial occupation in West Papua. It's not, Indonesia might label it as terrorism, separatism, armed criminal disturbances, but no, this is colonial and military occupation on indigenous land. And so, sorry, where was I? Yep. And then from that, I will explain the trend of human rights violations in West Papua, because what we are going to see during Prabowo era is pretty much will be the same, and if not worse. And in at the end of the presentation, I will then add what Prabowo has, Prabowo's position so far on West Papua. Okay, and first slide, please. So, where is West Papua? It's just really close. It's closer from West Papua to the top bit of Australia than from it's similar distance from Sydney to Newcastle. It is that close, and that's why I think it is very important for Australian people in Australia to, your solidarity is very important. And the land of New Guinea was first divided by imperial border to West Papua and Papua New Guinea. And after World War II, and then during the colonial era of Indonesia, it's further divided by colonial borders. I will go to that later on. Next, please. So this is the root cause of the why the armed conflict in West Papua, and conflict in West Papua seems to be never ending. So back in 1961, at the end of World War II, West Papua was under Dutch administration at that time. The Dutch has said that okay, West Papua, that West Papua already had their manifesto of independence. They on the 1st December 1961, they already played for the first time their national anthem, fly their national flag, which is now banned in in Indonesia, and all of that. So 2 weeks later, 2 weeks later, Indonesia invaded West Papua. In our school books, in Indonesian school books, we were taught that this is the moment Indonesia liberated West Papua. Only later on in my life, when I made friends with West Papuans, that I realized that for West Papuan people, that is the moment of invasion. They call it, they refer to it as Invasion Day. So so that's what happened. And then because of the dispute in 1963, there was a New York agreement hosted by the US. It's an agreement between Indonesia and the Dutch without West Papuan people about the the life of where West Papua will be. And in that agreement, it is decided that okay, there will be plebiscite, one person, one vote. And then in 1967, before the plebiscite took place, in 1967, Indonesia made agreement with the U.S. Freeport McMoran, the basically made agreement over the Grasberg mine, the largest gold and copper mine in the world. So in without the West Papuans, of course. And that's why 2 years later, 1969, where finally the act of free choice took place, the act of no choice, West Papuans would say, Indonesia had to win over West Papua because Indonesia had promised West Papua to the US. This is why what's happening in West Papua is US imperialism and also Indonesia's colonialism. So during the act of free choice, no choice, it was promised one person, one vote, right? But it only 1,025 people out of 800,000 West Papuans at that time were handpicked and coerced under gunpoint and the other coercive measure to choose Indonesia. And that's why we are here today. In West Papuan people have wanted their independence since the even before Indonesia took over, since European colonization. So yeah, next please. Next slide, I mean. This is just some graphic images about what's happening in West Papua. It's racial and colonial repression. It's not just ordinary human rights violation, but there's always racial and colonial flair to it. And in the left, that photo reminded us of what happened to George Floyd, and it sparked Papuan Lives Matter movement back then. And also in the middle, the two boys, those were boys. They were still 15 years old, and look how they were treated as trophy. And to the media, the Indonesian authorities said that they had been released because it was wrongful arrest. But until now, until today, they are still in custody, and they have no access to lawyers. They were accused of being part of the freedom fighters, and but with no papers whatsoever. And on the right side is the very graphic torture video that prompted a statement by the UN as well. It was the very graphic torture video that anyway, that's just some examples, because anyway, sorry. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering why you have not been hearing about West Papua. It's not your fault, really, because Indonesian government is really, there's war on information about West Papua that's been employed by the Indonesian government. So we are now thankful for smartphones because West Papuans can now quickly take photos, but often Indonesian authorities, security forces would raid and just took their mobile phones. But yes, nowadays we can see the evidence of this oppression coming out. And then because they took the photos, videos from smartphones and then uploaded to Facebook mostly, there's been a citizen journalism that is really, I base my advocacy a lot on that, try to amplify their messages. So international journalists and NGOs are practically under de facto ban from entering West Papua. And the RSF, the Reporters Sans Borders, rank Indonesia's freedom of press very low, specifically because West Papua. Over the years, that's stated in their website that if only that there's press freedom is better in West Papua, then Indonesia's rank will be higher in the scale of press freedom in the world. So and there's been recent trend of internet shutdown and also mobile reception shutdown, especially in areas where armed conflict is high. Then there's no reception for months. And it's very hard for us human rights defenders to try to verify or even get the information out. And while with that condition, when we human rights defenders activists try to get the other version, a version different from the government out, we will be labeled as spreading hoax. So that's why it's very messy. Even lots of Indonesians don't know what's happening. I used to be one of them, precisely because of this systematic, successful information, disinformation and misinformation on West Papua. Next slide, please. And this fake special autonomy, this is what Indonesia been defending themselves in international arena, that no, we have given West Papua their right to self-determination because they already have special autonomy, but actually not at all. So 3 years ago, after 20 years of special autonomy, 3 years ago, a renewal of special autonomy in West Papua was forced through amid thousands and thousands of protests. Protesters, mobilizing a mass demonstration. Dozens have died for it, but it was forced through. And if we look back at the first, so the first special autonomy was formed, was created in 2000. 1 week after the father figure of West Papuan people was assassinated, because Tais Eluai, he was the father of West Papuan nation. Tais Eluai was murdered because he was adamant in saying that no, West Papuan, we want independence, give us referendum, we want independence, and that's why he was assassinated. And a week later, the special autonomy was passed, and that is how it stemmed from bad faith. And it was it was written that West Papua has this autonomy, this and that, but it was all no nothing in its implementation. And even worse, in this renewal 3 years ago, those autonomy, it wasn't even there anymore. It was not even written anymore. And the one of the most harmful article was passed, That is that Jakarta, the central government, may also decide when to create new provinces inside West Papua. I will go further on this on next slide. This divide and conquer, these colonial borders imposed by Indonesia. So during the first special autonomy, West Papua was divided into two provinces. And during those 20 years, West Papuans indigenous people have become minority in their own land because there was the special autonomy, new administration, new money become pulling factor for settlers to come in. Oh, I forgot to mention that during Suharto era, there was a official government policy of settler colonial project. It's moving Indonesian settlers into West Papua, and during this special autonomy years that it's a project to Indonesianize West Papua. The name of the road become Indonesia. It's extreme marginalization. If you you can't really, because you're a foreigner, you can't really visit West Papua. But when you visit West Papua, you can see that the indigenous people are very marginalized. They sell random stuff in on the side of the road, while the owner of the shops are all Indonesian settlers. That kind of really extreme. And after the passing of this renewal 3 years ago, then a year later, West Papua was divided further into 7 provinces, and they are talking about right now expanding creating 2 more provinces. It's crazy because new administration, new province means new military headquarters, new administration, public offices, meaning that they will it's become pulling factor for settlers to come, and it will create further marginalization that and they haven't done official census since 2014 because I personally think that Indonesian government doesn't want to show the real number of how minority West Papuans on their own land right now. Next, please. This is what is really this is what is really urgent in West Papua right now: war of national liberation. It is recognized under international law, as we all know, thanks to the not thanks, but because what's happening in Palestine struggle. We are now aware that to fight against colonial occupation is justified by by any means necessary, and that is also what's happening in West Papua. They used to fight with bows and arrows in 1960s. Until now, they are fighting with smuggled weapons or corruption from Indonesia, that they got the weapons, and it's really it's never been before that war of national liberation in West Papua is this high. It's peak intensity. And next slide. Which has caused up to 100,000 internally displaced people because of this armed conflict. And Indonesia routinely harass these IDPs. And the one of the reasons actually that that the National Liberation Army is stronger than ever, because of these IDPs harassed by Indonesian authorities. They decided to join the Liberation Army because they feel safer with the Liberation Army, and it's a vicious cycle, and more than. So what finally triggered? If we reflect on what happened to Timor-Leste at that time, that what flipped Australian government's position was the Santa Cruz massacre. But this actually, more than 1,000 West Papuans have died, but over the years since 2018, it's not at a time, so it has less shock value, I guess. That what does it take for international community to eventually wake up and actually help West Papuan, because thousands have died, but slowly, and yeah, it's just a really desperate situation now. And next slide, please. And this is the state of militarization. These are all recent photos from the past month, and it's across West Papua. And so Prabowo has not been officially inaugurated as a president, but he has, but the because he has very close relationship with the Indonesian armed forces, and because he is the current defense minister. So the Indonesian armed forces has renamed the terminology in addressing a West Papua Liberation Army. They now officially call it as a Free Papua Movement, OPM. It means Jokowi has been trying to localize the armed conflict in West Papua. Jokowi been trying to use the police as the as law enforcement operation in West Papua, but by TNI is the armed forces, but by TNI actually renaming how they address West Papua, it's like a statement of declaration by TNI that no, we are taking over. We want to take over of the operation in West Papua. No more law enforcement. But as under international humanitarian law anyway, what the state is calling operation is, it doesn't matter. What matters is it's in implementation on the ground. And in fact, if we look at the type of weaponry, the intensity, it's already conflict led by Indonesian military on the ground in West Papua. And the defense ministry has also requested more budget for operations in West Papua. So that's how we are. I mean, the human rights activists, we are certain that West Papua under Prabowo will escalate. I mean, the armed conflict will escalate. It means more IDPs, more violence, more civilians, death, and more just basically it's more bloodbath than we are currently now, because Prabowo is already gearing up. He's not even in the office yet. And that is my presentation for today. Next slide, please. And I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Thank you for that excellent presentation. We are actually going to take, yes, questions and brief discussion points just about now. I think those QR codes are circulating somewhere, but obviously there's some just over here. Yes, if you're interested in becoming a member or contact for Socialist Alliance or a Green Left supporter, minimum of $5 a month, please proceed to do so, because I think you get an idea from this conference about what we're on about. Now, I will take, in opening the session, I will take a list of those who would like to contribute, but that will be at 3 at a time. The simplest thing you have to do is just raise your hand, and I will attempt to see. Oh, not so quick, please. I'm going to ask for that in a moment. But obviously, you're eager and you know what to do. Excellent. The procedures are designed to try and ensure we have a pretty fair and inclusive discussion. So you try and briefer the better, but 3 minutes tops, people. The session is being live streamed. I'm looking down the back to double check that's correct. Just on the notes. So please be aware if you're asking a question or making a point of discussion. In fact, I think I'll ask people to come here, because I think that's where people on a video can hear us. That will be filmed and will eventually go public on YouTube as well. So let's go to that. We've got about 20 minutes, 3 people, 3 minutes. So I'm going to go the guy down the middle first, and then Susan, and is it Caleb? I thought it was Caleb. I'm learning some names here. Excellent. Those 3 first will be fantastic. Thank you. So do you want to come? I guess those who kind of come up to the thing so that Veronica can hear you as well.
Okay, it's mainly to Rebecca. Just a couple of things. Like I know it's like we used to have like really strong ties with the PRD and other left-wing groups. Like, what is the state of the Indonesian left at the moment? Also, like I know it's one thing. Like the whole shifting of the capital of Jakarta to like Kalimantan. Can you like say something about that?
Hi Veronica, Susan Price here. It's great to see you on the screen, and thank you and thanks Rebecca for excellent presentations. I've really just got a question actually about Indonesia's attempts to recruit allies in the region by striking, defence deals with PNG and other places. Just if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of its geopolitical strategy to shore up support. Thanks.
So I'm not old enough to know about. I was not alive during the time of the East Timor independence movement and stuff. But I've sort of got 2 thoughts. Like, firstly, because I've heard that Indonesia considered East Timor sort of just a small pebble in its shoe, like not of value, while West Papua is so important to its economy. So sort of like, if it took that much to win, to rescue a pebble in its shoe, how much is it going to take? How big are we going to have to get in solidarity to be able to liberate the key part of its colonial economy? And the other thing is sort of like, how do we develop this Palestine solidarity movement in a way that really highlights the struggles of West Papua, and like once this campaign is over, we can build the campaign for West Papua? And because like I know in Melbourne they sort of start doing it, like incorporating it into their messaging, but like what does it look like afterwards in the coming years?
Veronica, thanks for those excellent questions, people. And Veronica, do you want to start with some responses?
Thank you for the question, Susan. Yeah, definitely there's been an effort by Indonesia, massive efforts actually by Indonesia to bribe Pacific nations. So when the like all movements, West Papua movements have fragmentation in the internally, but finally in 2014 they were united under, well, still are united under the umbrella called United Liberation Movement for West Papua, ULMWP. So in the beginning, Indonesia underestimated the power of ULMWP, the power of unity of West Papuan movement. So Indonesia was still kind of ignoring what's going on, and then finally, at the a year later, a year since the formation of ULMWP, the issue of West Papua was raised at the UN General Assembly for 23 times by 23 countries, and then after that it was a slap to Indonesia. But this past few years, especially this past 5 years, Indonesia finally really taking it seriously, that it started to give scholarships to PNG students, and then also donate aid money to Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, and other Pacific states. And really, so initially, Indonesia on the diplomacy level, it's very not classy, like actually like barking at the Pacific states who speak out for West Papua. But this past 3-5 years, Indonesia is using money to bribe the Pacific states, and it's been quite working so far, except for Vanuatu, because the founding father of Vanuatu say that Vanuatu is not free until all Melanesians are free, and that is like really embedded in Vanuatu life, and so the governments are sell out the Pacific, but that's why the people of the Pacific, many are angry at their governments, because how could you be the sell out to Indonesia. And this is why I think Australia should be like too, because Australian government obviously have huge interest in Indonesia, but the Australian people, taxpayers, Australian, you have to demand the governments to do something about West Papua and not just being sell out. And Australian government is using taxpayer money, your money, to train Indonesian military, and also especially the anti-terror squad, and also train Indonesian police. That the Guardian did investigation a couple of years ago that an Australian trained, who is now head of police in South West Papua, have conducted this appalling human rights abuses. So this is your taxpayer money being used to indirectly, being used to oppress West Papuans. This is why Australian people have to speak up. And yeah, that's Rebecca.
Thanks for those questions. Zeb, yeah, was your questions earlier? Oh, sorry, Alex. Sorry. Just in terms of the state of the Indonesian left, it's a vexed question. It's extremely fragmented. There are small groups based in different kind of geographic locations with different kind of perspectives. There's some who organise around a popular online academic blog. There are others that organise based on campus in Yogyakarta. There are those that organise with workers in Yogyakarta, with worker groups and trade union organisations in Jakarta. But it's highly fragmented, and also they don't connect up with each other. What is interesting is the increasing, the orientation of young people, young university students, to campaigning around the environment, particularly through organisations like Walhi. And these young people, certainly in Central Java, my interaction with them, are very interested to study Marxism and Marxist political economy and those kinds of things as a way of being able to explain why this natural resource extraction and acceleration of exploitation of human beings and the environment is going on. And this is a new generation of activists. In terms of the old left, the PRD left, again, totally fragmented. We've got people who've participated in supporting Prabowo's election campaign and have been given positions. We've got others who were part of the SBY's government advisors. We've got people who've been brought in to a whole lot of Jokowi's ministries and directorates that fall under those ministries. And then there are others who just continue to do what they can wherever they are. But this fragmentation of social movements has had a huge impact on people's ability to organise centralised groups, I suppose, of left-wing radical activists. It's probably not a satisfactory answer. I don't even know, right, because it is so fragmented, but yeah, through different means, keep in contact with as many of these different individuals and stuff as we can. I think that a lot of us are really, really concerned at the moment about this massive acceleration in the super exploitation of the environment and human beings. And so this is forcing, if you like, people to start to reach out. For like a long time, we just like feel a bit demoralised and a bit like it feels like we can't do anything. But seeing younger generations of activists coming through different kinds of organisations. There is a Green Party that has a very interesting program, but more based around people who come from academic circles. There's a lot of academics that started organising an academics union for the first time in Indonesia that crosses both academics and also general staff in universities, particularly in response to a lot of academics have been criminalised over the last 5 years for speaking out about different aspects of state policy and violation of human rights, for example. On the new Indonesian capital, it's an interesting question. I think that the political elites and economic elites in Indonesia are very committed to moving the central capital from Jakarta to Kalimantan. However, they're struggling at the moment, and Jokowi certainly has been pushing for this to take place formally before he finishes his presidential period. But they're struggling with who's going to finance it. So Jokowi's policy has been trying to secure foreign capital to do this. I mean, try and imagine, this is in the middle of forest area, right? They're just going to build a national capital. So they haven't really worked it out. Meanwhile, the business and a large section of the manufacturing sector of the economy will still be based around Jakarta and West Java. And the vice president, which is Jokowi's son, is going to be in charge of this new megapolis, right, that takes in not just Jakarta, but a big expanse of West Java and Banten provinces. So the ruling class is really trying to work out how they're going to do this. Prabowo is saying that they're going to push ahead and do this, but he's talking about it might need to involve budgetary planning for the next 20 years, right? So, and foreign capital with this transition between Jokowi and Prabowo is incredibly uncertain and basically seems to be retreating from putting their money into that investment. Yeah, don't know if that answers the question, maybe. Just on this question of what Caleb, right? How big does solidarity have to get? It needs to get really big, I think. And I think not just outside of Indonesia and West Papua, but it needs to get really big inside Indonesia. And this is one of the very important things, I think, from our experience in the 1990s, where organisations like the People's Democratic Party actively campaigned to support East Timor people's struggles for independence. And I think this is one of the things when maybe, I don't know, Veronica, if you have any comments on the All Eyes on Papua, and this kind of, there's been a lot of discussion in social media, and as far as I can see, some good popular support from ordinary Indonesian people against the human rights violations, particularly, that are going on in Papua. In terms of Australia, I just want to link a couple of things. The big thing we did in the 1990s was jump up and down about how Australian government and Australian business is absolutely entrenched in this like human rights violation across the Indonesian archipelago, in East Timor, in Aceh and West Papua. But we can also see it's not limited to that. So when Susan had the question before about Indonesia's deals with other countries in the Indo-Pacific, I think this is really important for us to gather as much information as we can about what Australian ruling class interests, both politically and business-wise, in this region, so that we can expose it and start to look at the opportunities for rebuilding those people-to-people links. That campaign took a really long time. This is not something that was able to build overnight, and for many years our demonstrations were literally 10 people, 15 people on a street corner gathering for an hour and a half. But there were different political moments from the early 90s until Suharto fell in 1998, where there were political incidences that took place in Indonesia which we were able to blow up because we'd done that really consistent campaigning work day in, day out, and particularly through Green Left Weekly. Obviously, our street presence with Green Left is not what it was in the 90s, and social media is, you know, one of the forums we have to think about for doing that. Living in Indonesia, I don't really have the answers for how you do that. But yeah, I think these are questions that we need to think about. But mobilising people, as we've seen with the mass demonstrations in solidarity with the Palestinian people, I think we need to do it. And maybe Veronica's got more to say about that.
Thank you. Actually, there's from there's a front of Indonesian people for West Papua self-determination. It was founded in 2016, and I was actually one of the co-founding members. And the group consists of many dozens of left groups, mostly student groups who are clear on position on supporting the right to self-determination of West Papuan people, and they have since been persecuted, not as bad as West Papuan people, but really bad. That Indonesian soldiers would come to their parents, to their universities. Some got expelled from their universities, and they are really what is it, like, got the really harsh treatment. And it's growing. The movement keeps growing, and the movement, the West Papuan movement, is now trying to establish similar organization but based in West Papua, which means that Indonesian settlers, we need a group of Indonesian settlers who support West Papua in West Papua. So right now the group outside West Papua already formed, but we need a one inside West Papua. And yeah, if the comrades here in Australia want to link up with the Indonesian front, that would be excellent. Because more, and we like to campaigners, West Papua campaigners especially. Well, I've been using this tactic because Indonesians are a huge supporter of Palestine. It's like everyone, politicians, the people, all support Palestinians. It's very clear. So in order to pass this brainwash that I explained earlier, I'd like to tell my fellow Indonesians, hey, do you know how Israel do this in misinformation about the attack? And Indonesia is doing it to West Papua. So I'd like to change the word Israel to Indonesia and like to open up their eyes. And it's so far been working really well. And of course, it's because it's the same colonial textbook, and it's interconnected struggles between Palestine and West Papua. And yeah, Australian solidarity is very important. I, for the first time, saw the photo of the solidarity in Sydney for Indonesia during the 1998 from Rebecca's presentation. It was really, it was beautiful. So yeah, thank you.
I'm going to get a bit editorial. Probably can take two more questions. Rachel and I don't know, guys. Max. Sorry. Keep it brief, comrades.
I'll be quick. Thank you both very much for your presentations. Yeah, I think as we're remembering the East Timor struggle and also involved in the Palestine struggle, we do need to think a little bit more about how to advance in the big cities because, yeah, we noticed in Gothenburg that the council, it's not particularly left-dominated, passed a motion to boycott Israel, Morocco and Russia, and so combined the key independence struggles of that day. And is there some way that we can start doing that in the major cities? I know I was involved in East Timor Solidarity in Melbourne, and the rallies were quite small, and then they built and built and built. But yeah, I think we've got to think a little bit more about how to advance on this front because Australian capital is so enmeshed with the Indonesian assault on East Timor. So, and just a question therefore, what are the levels of organisation in Indonesia and Australia for West Papua? And what are some of the big key days of mobilising that we should focus in on?
Sorry, I missed the first question. The the fragmentation at the level of organization. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So the it's It is for specifically for West Papua. The movement is quite consolidated. It just needs to get bigger because Indonesia is very huge, right? And the they have regular meeting, and yeah, it's quite organized. It's the sorry, the other question. I should have written it down. I'm so sorry. Um,
Veronica,
and
are there key dates where
yeah,
in
key
Australia
date.
people could
Sorry.
mobilise?
Yes, the most important date in for West Papua is 1st December. And there are other key dates, but I think if we start to mobilize from I'm at is it's 1 December. It's because 1 December is when the West Papua already got the manifesto of independence, the national anthem, national flag, and many West Papuans call it as the Independence Day. And it usually got the most repressive treatment by Indonesian government. In 2016, 2,000 people were arrested on that day, and we expect similar harsh treatment every year. So it's about solidarity of the day of the self-determination struggle, and also it's a form of all eyes on Papua, because they will be repressed harshly on that day.
Thank you both very much for the really interesting talk. I suppose my question is a really basic one and maybe overly simplistic, but so say I'm going to the Friends of Palestine WA meeting tomorrow and I want to put forward a motion that we're going to include a West Papua element to the next rally. What are some demands that we can put forward that are going to be clear and concise that we can communicate to in that rally, I guess?
Veronica, do you want to answer that question first?
I'm still thinking.
Oh, yeah.
If you wanna chip in, then go ahead.
I'll just say something brief while you're still thinking. I'd love if Veronica can say something about this. I think what's coming out in the discussion is that it looks like there are possibilities for points of coordination. Obviously, in Australia, Veronica is a key person in terms of coordination and making those linkages across different areas. We've got comrades, I think, pretty representative from different parts of Australia that perhaps we could organise, whether it's by meeting online or whether it's through email communication or whatever works best, to talk about some of these kinds of things. I think it's a brilliant suggestion in the context of these mobilisations to start to make connections and to possibly look for the opportunity to have speakers to talk about West Papua, because I think building linkages of social solidarity for peoples all across the world is just, it's just logical, it's strategic, as well as being absolutely the right thing to do. So I don't know, Veronica, if you have any kind of concrete suggestions around that.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think your suggestions are excellent. And I think the key problem in Australia about West Papua is lack of awareness. So we have to tackle it first, I think, by like Rebecca suggested, do more discussions about West Papua, mention West Papua during rallies, and in Palestine rallies in Sydney, West Papua is often mentioned already. But people don't know what's really happening. And I think that's key first. And then, like, if we go to specific demand, there is nothing more urgent right now than humanitarian assistance to the IDPs, to the internally displaced people. They are in the forest, undocumented, unassisted, and not being recognized by the government. Because if government recognize that there are like 100,000 IDPs, it means there is Papua problem. No, they deny that. And so human rights activists been demanding foreign governments to push Indonesia to open access for humanitarian assistance. In normal world, ICRC, UNHCR, UNICEF will already be on the ground helping these IDPs, but they cannot enter West Papua. So that is the most urgent things, because people are dying. And yeah, so that is the most urgent, I think. But in conclusion, the key is to raise more awareness. We need more people to talk about West Papua, more discussion. And actually, the key person in the key West Papua person in Australia is Roni Kareni. He is based in Canberra, and I'm happy to link up. I talk with him all the time.
Saying there's also all the aid and training provided to Indonesian military and police, because actually very closely related in Indonesia. That's a very historical thing. They don't draw a real distinction even. I think we want to thank Veronica and Rebecca very much for what they have brought to us today and what we've been able to discuss today. And look, it's very much part of the theme and clearly leads into this conference's afternoon discussions, especially 2 p.m, against war and imperialism, people-to-people solidarity in the Asia-Pacific region. I think that's pretty clear as we go into those other afternoon sessions. In the meantime, there's lunch. Lunch is until 2. Please be back by 2. The cover has come off. The foods are emerging. The food smells emerging even more rapidly. So thanks to everyone, and we'll grab some lunch, and we'll be back at 2 for Against War and Imperialism.